future soon, but what we're going to do is have a look at it in a slightly different way. We're going to have a look at it in what's known as the world of the text. What we're really doing there is having a look behind the text, which basically says, where did the authors come from? What was going on at the time of the writing? We're going to have a look at the world of the text. In other words, for example, a story of Jesus would be what's actually happening in the story in the time of Jesus. And then we're going to look at the world in front of the text. What's the meaning? What's actually happening? What are we trying to learn? To do this, though, instead of using Scripture, we're going to use a little example of a more modern-day book, one written in 1961, but still has resonance today as well, which is Catch-22. You can watch it on TV as well, or read the book. But what we'll do, we'll have a little examination of what was behind the text, what is happening in the text, and what is happening in terms of in front of the text. So what do we know of the world at the time in which the text was written? We do know that it was in the 1950s, late 1950s, published in 1961. So Joseph Heller, the author, was influenced by the Korean War and the Cold War, which did affect society at the time. There was a sense of fear, there was a sense of a distrust of communism, and there was McCarthyism. So McCarthyism was where people in America was pointing the finger at other people, saying, I think he's a communist, in order to avoid being labelled a communist themselves. It was also a time when the Vietnam War was starting. And as far as the culture of the community at the time, there was a very anti-Vietnam sentiment. And because of that anti-Vietnam sentiment, this book was very, very popular amongst young people. They saw it as an allegory for their times. When the language which is being used within the text as well also reflects the time it was written. For example, even though it was set in World War II, Heller does refer to IBM computers and a number of other things which were culturally from the 1950s and going into the 1960s. Joseph Heller himself was a bombardier during the war. He flew 60 missions himself, which is an awful lot of missions. The main protagonist, Yossarian, he's getting up to 60 missions and he's certainly trying to get out, but of course they keep changing everything on him and keep raising the missions. So maybe Heller's own experiences, the person who wrote the book, make a big difference to how we can actually understand it. So within the world of the text itself, what we're really looking at here is who is in the story. There's no real minor characters. There's a number of well fleshed out characters, but the main protagonist we seem to see is Yossarian, the Yo-Yo as they were calling him in the recent program there. And there are no heroes. That maybe it's an allegory again for the war, having no heroes, only victims. So where was it set? When was it set? What were the actual events which go through? And there's a number of horrific war witnesses from Yossarian, so that they are sort of adding to the whole collection about what is the message. One other thing which is really important when we're looking at the world of the text is the language used. What words need explaining? And Catch-22 itself is a phrase which represents a paradoxical situation, something where you can't get out of. So in order to actually escape the situation, you need to follow certain rules, but those certain rules don't allow you to escape. So I'll let you listen to part of the recent TV programmes to explain Catch-22.
Doc, look, you gotta help me. Let's forget about the liver. You can ground me if I'm crazy, right?
Oh, sure, I have to. I have to ground anyone who's crazy.
Then ground me, I'm crazy.
You're not crazy.
But I am. Ask anyone, they'll tell you how crazy I am.
Yeah, but they're crazy.
Then why don't you ground them?
Why don't they ask me to ground them?
Because they're crazy, that's
why. Of course
why.
they're crazy. I just told you they're crazy, didn't I? And you can't have crazy people decide whether you're crazy or not.
Is Orr crazy?
Oh, he sure is.
Can you ground him?
I sure can, but first he has to ask me to.
Then why doesn't he ask you?
Because he's crazy. He'd have to be crazy to want to keep flying combat missions. Sure, I can ground Orr, but first he has to ask me to.
And that's all he has to do to be grounded?
That's it, just let him ask.
And then you can ground him?
No, then I can't ground him.
Why not?
Catch-22. Anyone who wants to get out of combat duty isn't really crazy. Catch-22 specifies that a concern for one's own safety in the face of danger, real and immediate, is the process of a rational mind.
What?
Orr's crazy, and therefore he can get out of flying combat missions. All he has to do is ask. But as soon as he asks, he's no longer crazy, and so he has to fly more missions.
What?
Orr would be crazy to want to fly more missions and sane if he didn't. But if he's sane, then he has to fly them. If he flies them, then he's crazy, and so he doesn't have to. But if he doesn't want to, then he's sane, and so he has to.
That's some catch, that Catch-22.
It's the best there is.
The structure of the text is also very important. This wasn't a straightforward chronological story. It was non-sequential. Things didn't happen in sequence, but you didn't get confused. The sequences linked one to the other. There were little bridges between each chapter. It was told from different points of view. Every person had their own sort of section of the book in order to tell the story from their point of view, and you see things which have happened from other points of views coming in. You see things that happened throughout the actual story. So, what about in front of the text? These are the messages which we can take from the text, the things we're learning, the learnings which we have. Is there anything that can be challenged or questioned by a reader today, for example? Is there anything that allows a modern reader to make a new understanding, not intended by the author? And one of the things which I got from a second reading of the book was maybe Yossarian's motivation, what motivated him to behave and act in the way he did, but also, was it selfish, really selfish, because, spoilers here, many other people suffered or were killed even because of his decisions, because of his selfish drives. Maybe that's something which maybe wasn't intended by Joseph Heller. Again, life experiences, gender, the culture of the person who's reading it today can make a difference. So, for example, with my life experiences, very different to a 16-year-old today, because when I read it, the world was very different. But I also come from Lincolnshire, which is known as Bomber County. So I've got a personal interest in that whole concept of the bombers, the whole concept of the World War II, because that's what I grew up around. So these are of interest to me. So I'm taking things differently out of it to somebody today. And it's a very different world today. So maybe that message is seen as different. So how can I go deeper into studying this particular book? Well, I could have a look at that narrative criticism. Did the story tell the story the way it should? But maybe a historical criticism. For example, what was the life expectancy of somebody who was in the Air Force? My understanding is that 4 missions was about the life expectancy of somebody in the tail guns. So, again, 60 missions, it gives them more sense as they're building up to those missions, and more missions included, that you're running out of luck. And that would, if it was historically correct, would actually help me understand that. So there you have it, an exploration of the text, looking at the world behind, the world of, and the world in front of that text. We can apply that to Scripture. Don't forget, with Catch-22, we might even be able to look at it in a very modern day context. One of the themes in here is about capitalism, how Milo, despite anything, just keeps on making money. He even bombs his own airway in order to make money. Doesn't see anything wrong with it. We're living in a pandemic time. Maybe the allegory for you in your time is that people are going to make money out of the coronavirus. People are going to see an opportunity. And maybe that's the commentary which, for you, is in front of the text.